Germany was neither a state nor a nation at the opening of the 19th century. The eventual unification of Germany as an empire under the leadership of Prussia was a climactic point not just in German history but in European history as well. The history of Germany in the quarter century of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic rule showed that the process of collapse and renewal would pose problems which the 19th century was called upon to solve. The problem was, on the one hand, what was the political community and how could it be recreated? In other words, how to bridge the gap between the nation and the state. On the other hand, how would the claim of the individual to participate in the political processes of the community on a basis of equality be reconciled with the process of governance? The 19th century was ultimately to resolve these questions, leading to the eventual unification of Germany under Prussia's leadership. But after 1815, after the Congress of Vienna, it seemed Germany had several options. The first one was the liberal path. The people of Germany could respond to the calls of people like, of philosophers like Kant and Humboldt, and begin a movement independently of the rulers or the princes and try and unify Germany. A second could have been the revival of the old hierarchical society or the hierarchical structure within the old political structure of Germany under the Holy Roman Empire. Here, the role of the Habsburg monarchy, the Austrian Empire that is, would have been very crucial. And the third could have been the Prussian path, which they ultimately took. The option was hardly developed in 1815, but as the century progressed, Prussia emerged as the strongest and the most crucial of the German states. The struggle against Napoleon had forged a certain sense of unity among the Germans. The patriots were sorely disappointed after the Congress of Vienna had reduced Germany into a confederation of 39 states. Austria was given predomination over the other states, and Austria was the president of the Federal Diet. This is something the liberals and the patriots did not like, and they resented the continued and dominant presence of Austria. Napoleon had reduced through his reorganization the number of principalities from 300 odd to about 38. There were other factors which acted against greater unity as well. One of these was the character of the Prussian monarchy. The Prussian king was conservative, Frederick William III. He would grant provincial diets, but with limited powers. They preferred the old estate system, and he continued to rule with the help of the landed aristocracy, the bureaucracy, and the church. A second factor that went against larger unity was the presence of Austria in Germany. Austria, as we have seen earlier, was the president of the Federal Diet and had a supervisory power over the Confederation. And we had seen in an earlier lecture that Metternich, as the president, as the chancellor of the Austrian Empire and president of the Diet, continuously intervened in the affairs of the German states to control any movement for change. A third factor was the social and the political role of the landed aristocracy. This was the dominant class, and in this context, the Junkers of Prussia, the Junker landed aristocracy, which is also a military aristocracy, is very important. And finally, there was lack of industrialization and urbanization, except for a few enclaves within Prussia and the rest of Germany. And they certainly meant that a thriving bourgeoisie as the vanguard of the liberal movement, as the vanguard of the movement for change, was largely absent in major parts of Germany. Yet the German formats as this liberal movement, or the movement that ultimately created the desire for larger unity, started taking shape in the decades after 1815. The factors that helped the growth of the liberal movement was first the War of Liberation against Germany, against Napoleon. Many of the young men who fought in this War of Liberation had been imbued with a degree of patriotism and visualized the possibility of larger unity, and were sorely disappointed by the arrangement at Vienna. The Napoleonic impact, of the Napoleonic rule and reorganization had also been a contributing factor. Napoleon's reforms, particularly in the Rhineland, allowed a unification of the market, trade and industry to flourish relative to other regions, and this created a significant bourgeoisie in this area. The contributions of Arndt, the Prussian poet, or Joseph von Jores, who edited the Rheinische Merkur newspaper, or had written a book called the Future German Constitution, had been significant. There were also historians like Dellmann or Friedrich List, who was a political economist. They were creating new ideas or absorbed ideas which had emanated from France and other regions, and they helped in spreading this, particularly among the young. Article 13, which allowed the states to grant constitutions, had not been followed everywhere. In Prussia, we had seen the limited nature of the constitution that Frederick William had granted. Constitutions were granted in many areas, but they all followed the old estate system of representation. Hegel, in his philosophy of right, favored the old corporate structure, the estate system, and he felt that individuals, giving representation of individuals, might lead to anarchy. The universities ultimately became the sites where liberalism grew very quickly. It is in the universities that a section of the teachers and the students spearheaded the emergence of a liberal movement. One agency was that of a fraternal society. Professor Luden of the Jena University started the first of these fraternal societies called the Burschenschaft. There was ultimately a national league of these Burschenschafts, and they were trying to bring together like-minded people with certain very simple demands. They wanted an opening up of the political space of the public sphere. In 1817, they organized a very great festival. It came to be known as the Wartburg Festival. And in this festival, they commemorated the third centenary of Luther's protest in 1517, and also the victory over Napoleon at Leipzig in 1813. I can quote from Gentz, who was a very important aide of Metternich and his secretary indeed for some time. He said, I'm quoting, "Of all the evils affecting Germany today, even including the licentiousness of the press, the student nuisance is the greatest, the most urgent and the most threatening," unquote. It has been quoted by Donald Emerson in Metternich and the Political Police. The final straw, as it were, was the murder of a suspected Russian agent, Kotzebue, by Carl Sand, a philosophy student. The ruler of Nassau, a small state, was also assassinated. So it seemed that reflecting what was happening in many other European countries, individual terrorism had also come to Germany. This was a matter of concern for someone like Metternich. He was now persuaded to see a universal conspiracy against monarchies, against thrones, and he decided to move in. The result was first the Karlbad decrees, where he persuaded the representative of states to adopt draconian measures to suppress any movement for change. Press censorship was clamped down, universities were brought under control, political agitators were jailed, liberal professors were kept under surveillance, and some of them even lost their jobs. And it seemed that a kind of a police state is what Metternich would have wanted German states to become. The next landmark would be the Revolution of 1830. Impact of the July Revolution in France in 1830 created a little flutter in some German states. Constitutions were introduced in Hesse-Kassel, Saxony and Brunswick. Indeed, the Duke of Brunswick was later overthrown. And there had again been attempts at creating some kind of liberal regimes, introduction of constitutions in some of these states. But they were not very strong. Yet the liberals tried to regroup themselves, and they demanded an assembly for all of Germany, that all the states must be sending representatives to a central assembly. Karl von Rotteck, who was dismissed from his post in the medical faculty of Freiburg University, started writing now, and he wrote over the next few years a political dictionary. The political dictionary in 15 volumes was, however, a cleverly disguised manifesto of the liberal party or the liberal groups in Germany. Georg Buchner, whose father had served in the Napoleonic army, now started a society for the rights of man in the Gießen University in 1834. He tried to rouse the peasantry, but after an abortive attempt to achieve this, he had to flee to Strasbourg. After this repression was unleashed, by 1837, most of the constitutions had been scrapped or suspended. 7 professors, including the celebrated historian Dellmann or Gervinus, had been suspended from work, and even a purely intellectual movement like Young Germany, which was inspired by the poet Heinrich Heine, had been very closely controlled. Even journals like Deutsch's Review was suspended. You know, it's significant that now you have Deutsch's Review, meaning a German review, which is evoking the idea of a whole of Germany, not the journal of a particular region or a particular place. In the general bleak atmosphere of the 1830s, the only silver lining was an economic phenomenon. It was the Zollverein, the customs union which Prussia spearheaded and had signed. It ultimately covered 25 states and a population of 26 million. The Zollverein, by bringing in these states together in a customs union, unobtrusively worked for larger political unity. The advantages that the economic union brought to the states, but particularly to Prussia, indicated the need for larger political administrative unity. What is even more significant is the absence of Austria in this union, customs union. Austria sought to join later, but Austria was steadfastly excluded from this. Indeed, it would not be wrong to argue that the Zollverein provided the basis which ultimately privileged Prussia as the most significant state in a position to take the leadership of German unification. The 1840s gradually became politically more exciting. Frederick William IV became the new king, and he tried to have a recourse to personal rule by attacking the bureaucratic domination. He gave concessions to the Junker aristocracy and wanted to enlist their association and their support to buttress what he visualized as a personal rule. He even sought some rapprochement with the Catholic Church. We need to understand this point. Prussia was a largely Protestant state, but the inclusion of Rhineland after 1815 meant Prussia now also had a sizable Catholic population. The Rhenish bourgeoisie now assumed the leadership of the liberal movement. In fact, they had always been active in this liberal movement. They hated the excessive domination of the Prussian state and indeed the power that the state enjoyed. And they were also against the domination of the Lutheran Church and the feudal classes. David Hansemann, a leading businessman of this area, submitted a memorandum to the king in 1840. He argued that a new constitution and a representative government would release the energies of the nation anew and would indeed work for improvement, for progress. His ideas sent intimations of anxiety to the bureaucracy and the privileged order. Academics were vulnerable to dismissal now for political dissent or any kind of radical political opinion. Yet there had been attempts to not only harbor these ideas, but to generate new ideas and to disseminate them. In 1842, Rheinische Zeitung, the Rhenish Times, the Rhenish Daily, was launched in Cologne to provide a forum for these wider discussions that might go against the Prussian government, that might also suggest ways of how to unify Germany and how to liberalize the political structure. Its editorial board included jurists, industrialists, and academics. Karl Marx, who studied law in Bonn and Berlin, worked in this for some time. Dahlmann was very influential now. His book Die Politik, or The Politics, published in 1835, called for self-government, representative institutions, and civic rights as the basis of freedom. In Baden, Rollek and Welcker preached against the absolutist monarchy, and there had been sustained demands for reform in many other German states. The liberal movement, as it developed, also enlisted the support of some rulers. Dahlmann, for example, he tried to visualize the state as a moral personality and independent of individuals. Now, this moral personality of the state should also have the subservience of the ruler, and the state would be above the monarch. They did not want any abrupt break with the past. They wanted what they called an organic development. And at any rate, these are the basic ideas of liberalism, and the liberal movement had some force now. Apart from the bourgeois liberalism that was developing, there was also a radical program that was being put forward now. radicalism developed, of course, in very limited political circles. While the liberals wanted legal participation in government and work for reform rather than destruction of the monarchical states, the radicals wanted popular sovereignty, universal suffrage, and in some cases even a republic. It is in the 1830s that one sees such men gradually emerging. Gutzkow, for example, August Becker, Weitling, and Moses Hess. They represented a radical tradition which was emerging. Moses Hess indeed wrote a tract called The Consequences of the Revolution of the Proletariat. The historian Agatha Ram has called him the first German communist. This radicalism, in a way, was linked up with the tradition that Hegel had produced and the following that Hegel had produced. There was a breakup of the Hegelian school after the master's death. The orthodox disciples constituted a conservative right wing. On the other hand, the young Hegelians considered the master's doctrine to be a philosophy of revolutionary action. They adopted dialectics as an instrument of action, and they considered that philosophy should serve to determine the rational progress of the world. They attacked established religions, and indeed Arnold Ruge mounted a virulent critique of the Prussian state, particularly the rigorous, all-embracing Prussian state that had emerged. Even among them there was a schism of sorts. Some veered towards individualism, excessive individualism, and clearly developed nihilist or anarchist tendencies, including individual terrorism. Whereas men like Feuerbach and Karl Marx formed a new critique of the society and prepared the way for socialism to emerge later. It would, however, be a mistake to exaggerate the role of the radicals in the closing years of the German liberal movement. And what is very significant is that since there was no industrial revolution, they did not yet have the backing of a social class for their movement. On the eve of 1848 then, the sources of discontent in Germany related to the statism of Prussia, lack of constitution, lack of freedom and lack of liberties, and therefore they were now determined to find a way to achieve this. The context was provided first in 1846 when there was an economic crisis sweeping the whole of Europe, and this provided the backdrop to the massive upsurge of 1848. In Germany, the liberals got together at a congress at Offenburg in September 1847, and they demanded a national parliament common to all Germans, something they had demanded in the early 1830s as well. In Heidelberg, a new newspaper started publishing, and it had a significant title of Die Deutsche Zeitung, the German Times, the German daily. The temper that German nationalism could produce was also made clear when the King of Denmark wanted to grab the whole of Schleswig. There was a possibility of a war which was avoided only at the last moment. It is in this fashion that the revolution of 1848 came to Germany, close on the heels of the revolution breaking out in France. There had been upsurge in Berlin in March, then again a more radical one in October in the Rhineland, where Marx and Engels were active politically speaking. And the king was ultimately obliged to grant a constitution, though he reneged on that ultimately. But what was more significant was the Parliament, or the central parliament which assembled at Frankfurt. This was an old dream of the liberals which had come true. Here they congregated, here they assembled, and over more than a year they argued, they discussed. Their discussions were informed with a high degree of idealism, with many brilliant ideas, but with little practical sense. And there was hair-splitting discussion of what they would call Germany. But more important, there was no clear conception of what Germany would be like. Two different notions of Germany had emerged now. One was Grossdeutsch, bringing in all German-speaking people, all German lands under the new United German State. And the other one was Kleindeutsch, or Little Germany, which essentially meant exclusion of Austria and the Habsburg lands and creating a Little Germany which would be dominated easily by Prussia. There was no solution. And ultimately they offered the throne to the King of Prussia. The King of Prussia refused to accept it, A, because it had come from an elected assembly, B, it was sure to lead him to trouble with Austria. And therefore, the effort of the liberals ultimately led to nothing. The result was almost a zero because Germany was not unified. Austria rallied, and the Prussian king for some time decided to take the initiative and unify Germany through Prussian leadership by his own personal initiative. But after Austria had rallied back, Prussia was defeated and had to sign the humiliating Convention of Olmutz. And Prussia agreed to keep the old Bund or old confederation, with Austria's predominance kept intact. Yet 1848 had not really been without its mark. German liberalism did not show itself to be effective. It was a curious alloy of the readiness to submit to authority combined with respect for human rights and for liberty. The liberalism of professors became a butt of ridicule in the subsequent years, but nevertheless, it had some significance. German nationalism did not suffer in the same way as liberalism did. What is significant was that it demonstrated that nationalism could now develop independent of liberalism. And there was also a radical agenda that had come into play. So 1848 in a way was a turning point when Germany did not turn and German unification was not achieved.